Now, coming to tonight's session, allow me to welcome Chandan Jaiswal, the host of this session. Chandan is a product manager working for a data analytics product with Wolters Kluwer with 7.5 years of experience in cloud, e-commerce, telecom, and audit domains. He has been contributing and managing customers from the APAC region with a focus on solving problems for accounting firms. Chandan has mentored and empowered more than 200 plus individuals in association with one of the leading training and development organizations. He's currently an alumni at the Institute of Product Leadership, pursuing the International Certification in Product Management Program. Great to have you here with us, Chandan. Handing the session over to you now.
Okay, so I welcome you all to the Product Leadership Festival on behalf of Institute of Product Leadership. This is the Digital Product Management edition. Today is the second day of the festival, and I welcome you all to this great session today. So before we start, let's look at what our audience want to intend to get out of this session. Shama, can you have a poll for ready for us so that we can see? And audience, can you just select a simple option from the poll?
On another note, viewers on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, please click on the Slido link in the comment section to take the poll. The link will take you directly to the questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Shama, for the poll. As every industry, each of you know that key to success is our customer and their needs. Great product solves a big customer problems in a unique and valuable way. To learn how to identify and meet needs, buy in for the investment using customer insight, and run experiment to test and refine on your solutions. So today in our session, so we're going to look at how we can build our product from customer insight and to develop innovation and in a way that it value to the customer and to the organization as well. I remember since we all have joined our corporate career, we always have heard about that customer is the only boss in the industry. And I hope each one of you agree with us on that note.
Should I share the second poll?
Yeah, you can share it. Let's wait for the people to vote for the second poll. These are your favorite brands which we are using in day-to-day life. See what you like. Okay, so before going ahead, I want to introduce the speaker for today. So let me help you welcome Christine Lee. Christine, let me give you a background of who Christine is. So Christine is a director of product at GoDaddy. Her team helps everyday entrepreneurs grow their business by building an online presence across websites, social media, and commerce. She has 15 plus years of career in product, has spanned in varieties of role of the industry for both established companies and the startup. Prior to GoDaddy, Christine worked at Hire, a startup that used machine learning to power a global marketplace for the tech jobs, where her team created a job candidate experience and supported tools for internal sales team. She has served as an executive sponsor for the diversity, equality, and inclusion. Christine was a product lead at Twitter, where her team was responsible for campaign management and analytics platform used to run Twitter ads. The other product roles include leading a partner integration at Intuit and developed and marketing a suite of enterprise customer relationship management tool for Sybils and the PeopleSoft. Both are acquired by Oracle now. Finally, she is proud to be a co-founder and board of Women's in Product, a non-profitable organization that helps women around the world to develop their career in product management. Christine holds an MBA from Veteran and BA from Duke University. So let me welcome Christine. Christine, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me in this session today.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to be here. Let me just get my slides up. Do you want to share your results for the poll while I do that?
Yeah, Shama, can you do that?
We shared the results, but here you go again on the second poll. Christine, do you want me to launch the first poll of yours?
No, not yet, but the
Okay,
second
sure.
poll is still showing. The one you did earlier.
You can go ahead and share your screen.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, great. Do you want me to close this window then?
I'm sorry, you'll have to go to the present mode.
Yes, all right. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
All right, let me see. I don't know if this window is visible. Let me just close it. All right, can you see the entire screen now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. All right, well, let's get started. Let's start now. I think we can start the poll. So I wanted to just ask, how many of you enjoy cooking? I know this is an odd way to start. Go ahead and fill out the poll. I have a photo here of a very simple tofu dish. It is a recipe that I got from my mom. And whenever I make this, even though I have the list of ingredients and the steps that she gave me, I found that I can never make it taste exactly the way she did it. So the last time we were able to have a visit with her, I decided to take a video and I asked her a lot of questions on how to make this dish. And now I can actually cook it in a way that it tastes almost as good as hers. So why do I bring this up? Today, we're going to talk about different ways that you can use to understand customer needs. And I'm going to be giving you basically a recipe. I'll start out with a framework, if you will. But then I'm going to follow that up with some tips on how to actually apply this based on things that I've learned over the years. And I hope that it will help you be able to use these tips in your own research. All right, so step one of our recipe, start at the end. How will your product or feature align with your organization's strategic priorities? This is something really important to think about before you even have your kickoff. When you are building any solution, investment is required. And so you have to be able to show your stakeholders what impact the solution can drive. So even if you're just, even if you're a founder and you work for yourself, you really should start with a thesis about why you should spend your time and energy building this product. And think about how you can measure your business outcomes and how long it's going to take you to achieve them. This is a really great way for you to prioritize as you're digging into the problem, because you can always think back about, at the end, what do I have to demonstrate in terms of impact? You also want to consider who needs to know what you're working on. You will almost always have an approver. It could be your boss, it could be your investor. So think ahead about who your stakeholders are. If you're at a bigger organization, you may have dependencies on other teams. You have possibly third-party partners that you'll need to work with in order to make your launch a success. So before you even get started, think about who these key people are. And that way, as you're working through your solution, you'll know who to include and who to keep informed, because as always, you want to communicate as often as possible. And the other reason that it's helpful to know who are the specific people that you need to keep informed is that it helps you get a sense of what kind of data you need to collect along the way and what kind of learning some of these constituents are going to be influenced by. When you think about the specific people you're going to be presenting your learnings to, you'll probably know that some people are more oriented towards wanting to see quantitative data. Other people might want to hear more about what customers were actually saying as you were doing this research, and how did your new product, as you were testing, make people feel. So if you can think ahead about who you're going to be sharing your results with, particularly if you're going to need approval for resources, it's really helpful to understand before you start any of this research what kind of data you're going to need to be successful. All right. So here's a framework you can use, and let's just go over it at a high level, and then I'm going to walk you through each of these. But basically, before you dive into your research, you want to start with a learning plan. And I've broken it down into 4 steps, and you're going to go through this at all the different stages of your product development process. And generally, at each time you go through it, you'll get some learning that will feed a new insight, and you can continue to go through this to iterate and improve your solution. The first input is your customer insights. And this is something that you typically already know from either past research or market data that your company or organization has. These are some of the types of insights that you may start with. Sometimes you'll know all of them, and sometimes you'll only know a few of them. But the main thing is that you generally start with some kind of observation about the customer that makes you curious, where you realize there might be a problem here, and your organization may be uniquely positioned to offer something to solve that problem. So insights come from knowledge you already know about the customer. Next, and this is very important, you want to articulate your hypothesis for what you're trying to learn. The hypothesis is basically what you want to prove in this part of your journey. It also specifies what your success metric is. And it's really good to be as specific as possible. So you could say, for example, one hypothesis could be, if we reduce the number of fields on this form, then completion rate will be higher. But it would be better if you said, if we reduce the number of fields on this form, the completion rate will increase by at least 10%. And setting that very specific outcome will help you know, as you're getting data back, whether you've actually optimized the form enough to drive completion rates. Because sometimes what will happen is you'll see some differences between control and treatment, And if you don't set what your actual target is, you won't really know what the bar is for success. So be as specific as you can when you're articulating your hypothesis. Now, once you have your hypothesis, you can plan how you're going to validate it. And this can be through either user research, or you can test it with experimentation. And there's really a huge variety of different qualitative and quantitative methods you can use. Generally, you want to pick the approach that's going to help you learn about the riskiest assumption that you're making at that point in your product development process, and focus the method on what is the best way for me to answer and validate that assumption. And then finally, you're going to repeat this process so that you can really refine your understanding of the problem and your solution design. So if you're working on a brand new product idea, you generally are going to start very broad. But as you continue to work on it, maybe you design and you've built the solution, then you'll likely structure very specific learning on what is important to the customer. So let me give you an example to illustrate this. Maybe your insight is an observation that people shop for groceries weekly at the store. And this seems like it takes a lot of time. So when you're early in the product development process, you'd probably be testing whether shoppers would sign up for a faster, more convenient way to order online and maybe pick up their groceries curbside. But at a later stage, once your product is launched already and people are starting to use it, you might be testing if the new UI for the online ordering app actually reduces time by at least 50%. So in the early stage, you're learning if there's a real problem to solve. And then later, you're testing how well your solution solves the problem. Okay, so that is the recipe. And now let's talk about what can go wrong and how to avoid them. So these are some learnings that I've gained over the years, and they've really helped me get a better understanding of what my customers need. So I'm hoping that this advice will be helpful to you as well. Why don't we do another poll? Shama, can you send the poll? Let's see how many of these problems you have heard about. Let me see if I can see the poll.
I hope everyone can see the poll. I see that they have been voting as well. Christian, can you see?
I actually don't see the poll.
I can also see.
It's on, and I'll let you know the results. I wonder why you can't see them.
All right. It's all right. Is everyone pretty much done voting? What does the majority of people say in terms of how many of these concerns they've heard about in the past?
So as 62% of them say a few of them have heard about the concerns, and about 36 to 40% say all of them.
Okay, great. All right, so let's go through these. All right, so one thing you may hear is you may hear a team say, we can't run market tests. The product isn't even built yet. Does this mean you can't test your solution in market? No. So typically, this is going to be, obviously early in your process, you haven't even built anything yet, but there are methods you can run where with real potential customers, you can get some learning about your solution. There's 3 different methods I would highlight. The first is called a front door test. And the idea here is that you want to know if people are interested in your solution. And so you basically might send an email with an offer, or you may add, if you already have if you have an existing solution and you're introducing a new feature, you might introduce in product a way to add that feature. And even though you don't actually have the solution built yet, what these kinds of tests will do is give you a sense of how many people are actually interested enough that they go to explore, sort of walk through that front door to come into your shop and find your solution. So it's a really great way to gauge interest. These other two tests are similar. There's a concierge test and something that's sometimes called a Wizard of Oz test. And in these approaches, it's similar in that you don't have to have the entire solution built out. But in the concierge test, you're upfront with the customer. You tell them, hey, I'm working on this idea and I'm going to work closely with you to deliver the value. Eventually, we're planning to automate this, but for now, I'm just going to work with you one-on-one and see where we're successful and where we need to keep improving. So the customer in this case always knows that they're an early participant and they're getting this one-on-one service that obviously isn't scalable, but as the product team, if you do this manually, you'll be able to get much deeper insights about what is important before you invest in building and automating the solution. In the Wizard of Oz test, it's similar. It's just that the customer in that case doesn't know that something that you're saying is automated is actually being done behind the scenes manually. So for example, this is kind of useful if you're running, if you're building a marketplace solution, or if you're doing something that needs a lot of logic and programming to be able to deliver. It may take you a really long time to build sort of the engine that powers the solution. And so what you can do in early stages is present the offer as something that's sort of, an automated way to match, A and B. But behind the scenes, you can do it manually and see and kind of produce the kind of results you eventually want to automate, and then just see how that lands with your prospective customers. And so for each of these, obviously, it's a great way to learn because you're really presenting something of value. And in the latter two tests, you're actually delivering value. You're just doing it manually instead of at scale in an automated fashion. I do think that it's important to make clear as part of these tests at some point, if your solution is not actually available, like in a front door test, eventually you should make it clear to your customer that, maybe they click into it and it says, thank you so much for your interest. This isn't available yet, but we're testing to understand how many people would like this solution. So just be upfront if you can't actually deliver the product. So on the other end of the spectrum, once your product is out and you have lots of users and you're able to run A/B tests, sometimes teams will gear the other way. They'll say like, oh, we have so much data, we should always run A/B tests. And then they sort of stop running any kind of qualitative research. And I think personally that this is a miss, because you ultimately just need to go back to your learning plan and think about what is the question I'm trying to answer at this point. There are a lot of good things that you can get out of a A/B test. You learn a lot about what people are actually doing in your product, which can be very different from what they say they'll do. You can get great feedback on what designs are more engaging, and ultimately you can even measure the impact that the change you introduced is having on some of your core metrics. But when you run these tests, you don't understand why your customer or user did or didn't do what you thought they would do. And you don't have a sense of what alternatives they're considering. And the biggest thing is you don't know how the customer felt. And that emotional piece is really important for you to get to as a product team, because that's what's really going to create wow moments or create so much frustration that ultimately that can cause people to not adopt your product. So it's really important that you have both sides of the learning, and you just need to think about when you need to run which method. Sometimes you can run both. You run an A/B test and then you follow up with some qualitative research to understand what's going on. So think broadly about what method is going to be best for you. All right, here's another example. You may hear, we don't have enough time and we don't have a budget for UX research. So I think that if you start to think about this kind of concern, just take a step back, because I'll share with you an example where, my team had no research budget and we didn't have a lot of time, but what you can do is just think about other ways you can get very quick learning. And the example I want to share with you is specifically something that some people, you may hear it called a customer safari. And that means just going out in the wild and seeing what people are doing sort of in their natural habitat and learning. So one of the things that I worked on in the past with my team was we had a lot of data about how customers were making purchases. And we thought there would probably be a way that we could uniquely aggregate that data, be able to have more purchasing power, and streamline how contractors specifically could order their supplies. But before we sort of jumped into building out this whole solution, we realized we didn't really know how contractors were ordering their supplies today. So we just decided to take a day and we looked up some local hardware stores that we know would serve our target user, these contractors, professional people who build and construct things. And we just went and stayed in the store for a few hours. We just kind of went, we observed, when contractors were coming in, like what time of day. We looked at we kind of observed how long they were staying in the store, how much they bought, what kinds of things they bought, whether they went and talked to a store associate. And so these are all just things that you can learn just by observing. So you don't have to spend a lot of time recruiting customers or figuring out incentives. You're just going into a public space and getting curious about what people are doing. And so as long as you can find a place that sort of simulates and brings the kind of users that you're interested in, you can get a lot of learning. So just in that one day, we learned a great deal. For example, we figured out that these contractors were actually going into the store because they often would talk to the store associates and get advice about how they're planning to make something, or they might have been working through a specific problem. And that was a really big insight for us to know that it wasn't just about purchasing. There was also this element of needing guidance during that process. Now, obviously you can't, it's kind of creepy to just eavesdrop on conversations. So at some point, even if you're in a safari situation, you can just walk up to people and say, hey, I'm researching a new idea. I noticed you were doing this. Would you have a few minutes for me to ask you some questions? So, make sure you're having you ask for consent, especially if you say like, I want to, I'd love to hear about what you're trying to ask the store associate about, and can I just listen in so I can learn? And some people will say no, but there's also a lot of people that are fine with it, especially if you explain like what your organization is and why you're working on this problem. So this is a totally fast, free way to quickly learn about your problem. And what's really great about going out in the field is that you'll start to understand, why is this a problem, and how are people solving this today, before you just jump in and spend a lot of time building. I've listed here some other ways that are mostly free, or at least pretty inexpensive, for you to get some feedback. The other one I'll sort of mention is called Follow Me to the Office. This is a technique I learned when I was working at Intuit, and it's a really fun way for the team to really build deep customer empathy. The idea is basically that you contact some of your target users. You usually do offer a small incentive, and you just ask them, can I just come to your shop or to your business and observe you for a few hours? And I just pretend I'm not there. I'm just going to watch what you're doing. And so it's similar to the previous example I gave around a safari. You're just there to be a fly on the wall, see what really goes on day to day. And because you sort of gotten consent from the customer, you can also notice when you notice something that you don't understand, like, why do you have all these sticky notes on your monitor? You can ask some questions and clarify with your customer about why they're doing that. And again, it's just a great way to immerse yourself in the real life of your customer, so you can clarify what is hard about the problem. How are they working around what's painful? And that can give you some really valuable insights about what you need to focus on. All right. Now here's another thing that comes up where maybe you do have a budget, you're a bigger company, and then sometimes you'll hear PMs say, oh, we don't have time to do that, but we have a whole UX research team and they run all the studies for us. And I think that is really great. I've also worked at some bigger companies, and you should leverage the experts. They are trained in how to run big studies. They can guide you on what method is best. But I'd encourage all of you to still bring your entire team. So not even just you as the PM, but bring your designers, bring your engineers into some sessions where you are all directly talking to customers. If you look at just these different pictures, you can just immediately notice some of the different emotions, the different settings. This one, this picture is a group of people working, but this bottom picture is another couple that's working. And it's just a very different environment. And this will affect how they engage with the solution you're offering. So all these contextual clues are things that you may not get if you're just reading a report. And the other big part of why you want to do this as a team at some point in your process is that it really builds this connection to the people that you're solving for. One of the things that I've sort of learned and heard, I think this probably came from Intuit, is you want your team to fall in love with the customer's problem, not the solution that you're building. And that can be a danger. You spend all your time as a product team sort of building out this product idea, and you get really enamored with the solution you're building. And then you kind of lose this connection to who are the people and the specific problems that we really wanted to solve for. So when you actually talk to real customers, you stay grounded as a team. And when you do these meetings, the other tip I would give is to debrief after each session. Sometimes people try to squeeze in a schedule with lots of different meetings so that you can get through as much as quickly as possible. But if you don't take the time after each session, I guarantee a lot of your sessions are going to kind of blur in your head. So build in breaks where after each customer session, you as a team can debrief. And generally, whenever you're meeting with customers, you should assign a specific role to everybody that's participating. There's different ways to do it. The way that I like to do it is one person keeps track and takes note on what the customer is actually saying as you're going through the session. Another person is just looking at what the user is actually doing, because often there's a difference between what people say they want and what people actually are doing. And so you want to have two people just really paying attention to that. Writing down specific quotes, and you can, write those down, post them around your office so you remember that voice of the customer as you're building your solution. But two other roles are, one person should just focus on how the user or customer is reacting emotionally. Like what is surprising to them? How did they react? What really brings out a smile as they're going through it? Those are really key moments that you want to take note of so that you can dive a little deeper into like, what did you do? What did the product do that was able to get that reaction? And then finally, the last role is just somebody that sort of, if you're actually able to go visit them in their place of business, take pictures with permission, take notes on what the environment is like so that you can really have a full picture of what the customer is doing and how they work. All right, so here's another one. Sometimes you'll run a study and you may hear a team say, that was really, really interesting, but I don't know what to do with that data. I don't see anything super actionable. And so I would raise this, and I have this picture of an ocean. And so you may have heard this expression, don't boil the ocean. Like you don't want to make your research questions so broad that you get a lot of data and it doesn't actually help you answer the immediate question you have at this stage in your product process. So it's just really important to be clear about what is the specific learning I need to get at this point in our product cycle, so that the research, whether it's qualitative or a test you're running, helps you answer that question and you can move forward. And a lot of times it is just thinking about all the assumptions you've made about what the problem is and thinking of and figuring out what's the one part I really am not sure of, and what would be a really big miss. If I make this assumption and the assumption is wrong, the whole rest of the solution isn't going to work. That's your riskiest assumption. So if you have that mindset, a lot of times you'll be able to focus your research method and your questions on the right part of the problem. And so this will vary depending on if you're very early in your process. And at that point, you're really trying to make sure that this problem is big enough, is interesting enough to for the team to invest more time in. And then at later stages, when you've already sort of designed and built something, you're more likely to be focused on, does my solution actually solve the problem? So it sort of goes from broad to narrow as you work through this process. Here's another problem that comes up. You go through and do a bunch of work, run a bunch of tests, and you bring it back to whoever is the approver for your project, or maybe you're bringing it to some other teams that you have dependencies on, and you don't get the green light to get the resources you need to actually build and refine the product. And when this happens, it's, and it does, because every organization has to prioritize. A lot of times the reason you can't get through that milestone is that, the team hasn't started with the end. They didn't start with thinking about who are the key stakeholders for this idea. Because when you know who the approver is and you think about what kind of data do we need to show to be able to convince whoever's making the decision, all of that feeds into how you communicate, how you structure your tests, what kind of method you use, because all of that is working towards, in the end, like, what am I going to show to my boss or my investor to be able to get approval for this? And so sometimes, you may find that there isn't really a business case for it, but obviously you wouldn't be pushing for approval if that were the case. So if you really believe in the solution, just make sure you are thinking well ahead of what your strategic priorities and goals and outcomes that you need to deliver are, and really explain how what you have learned is convincing you that investment will deliver the key outcomes, the KPIs that the organization cares about. Now, sometimes you really may just hit a dead end and there's just no funding at this time, but I would encourage you to just think about bringing it back if you really believe in that idea. So I said, look for detours. Sometimes it's just a matter of timing. Sometimes leadership changes. Just pitch your idea again, share that data again, and you'd be surprised. A lot of time I have seen that an idea that initially was turned down can later get approved. And then here's sort of, I think this is my last little tip. Sometimes you'll hear that you've run an experiment and this team is so frustrated because the experiment failed. And when this happens, there's two things. One is that it's a sign that the team is probably more enamored with their solution than with the problem. And second, I think that if there's this feeling, then it probably means that you're not thinking enough about what you've learned from the test that failed. Generally, when you're running experiments at scale, and this is, particularly if you're running A/B tests, if you never have any tests that lose, then you're not taking big enough bets. You're probably being very conservative in your hypothesis, and you're testing things that you may not really need to test because you're constantly winning. So that's one signal that you need to take bigger swings. But failures are actually really great, and you should think about them that way, because if you run a test and it fails, it means that you have now determined very early that the solution isn't right. And so you don't need to spend a lot of time and energy and resources building something that's not going to work. So it helps you identify very early that something's not right. And sometimes you may find that you just set up the test incorrectly. Maybe the change wasn't really noticeable. Maybe you didn't pick the right metric to focus on when you were formulating your hypothesis. Testing is a skill, and the more tests that you run and get that practice, the better you and your team will be at refining how you run these tests. So just think of all of that when you get frustrated when your experiment fails, and figure out what you can learn from that outcome. Honestly, the only bad tests are those where you run them and you end up saying, well, it was inconclusive. It didn't seem to hurt anything, but I didn't see a win either. And that's frustrating because at that point, it means you spent a lot of time, you ran something, you didn't get to stat sig on the result, and you really don't know, did it work, did it not work? And that is frustrating. So you want to have a clear win or a clear failure, because both of those give you very specific insight about what's working or not. So those are my tips, and I want to again thank you for inviting me to speak today. And I'm happy to take more questions, or you can also send me a tweet. My handle is right there.
Thank you, Christine, for the brilliant session. The keynote was amazingly relevant and with useful insights. It was very captivating. So, Chandan, can we begin with the Q&A now?
Yeah. So there are quite a few questions which are pouring in. So I'll pick it up some of them and try to have them combined. Okay. So Christine, one of the question which a lot of people are asking is how many iterations of these method we need to run through so that we can qualify in a way that we can say this is going to work and we are going ahead with that. So.
Okay. Yeah, there's no magical number. You may only need a few tests in the beginning, or you may need a lot. The key thing is to go back to what is the hypothesis you have, and that is what are you trying to validate? So really get clear on the question that you're trying to learn at that point in your process, and define what success looks like. So if you say, I want to reduce the time it takes to complete this form by 10%, then you run as many tests as you need to be able to hit that goal. So that's why it's really important to be specific when you're defining like what is the data I need to validate this question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for your answer.
Yeah.
So one more question: how do we question from Darshan? How do we define the hypothesis validation criteria properly so that solution is deployed in the field does indeed resolve the customer's problem?
Well, so the question is, how do you know? Can you repeat it? How do you know that you have actually validated it?
Yeah, how do we define the hypothesis validation criteria properly? So that's what he's wanted to ask, so that we are sure that we are making sure that it will going to resolve customer's problem.
Well, ultimately, what you're trying to demonstrate is that, particularly if it's a paid product, that what you have created is something people are willing to pay for. And you may measure that in many different ways. And so as a team, I think this is where, again, for the validation criteria, you just think about right now, what is the most important outcome we need to demonstrate? Think about what your strategic priorities at your organization are. Maybe it's that you need to improve NPS on the product, or maybe you're trying to drive conversions. And if that's the most important thing that your solution needs to be able to deliver, then that becomes a very high priority for you to test and validate. And then set a clear goal on what success looks like. And if you're able to show that, then you kind of know that you're done and you can move on to the next question. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, a lot of questions are pouring in. So one of the questions from Anshuman: how do you size a market problem and decide which problem to solve?
So when you're looking at whether the opportunity is big enough. There's several different ways you can size it. So first, you want to define what the market is, and I would think broadly about the problem you're trying to solve, because sometimes PMs miss that there's a lot of different ways to solve that problem that aren't that, for example, there's a lot of tools for managing customers, and you may think your market is CRM solutions, and you'll go and figure out who are the big competitors and how crowded is this space. But in real life, what customers are actually doing is maybe using a spreadsheet to keep track of a lot of their data. So you always want to think about not the size of your sort of traditional solution space that you're in. You want to think about broadly, what is, how big is this problem? How many people really have this? And then go size it in that way. So that's why all of this, ends up tying back to think about the problem you're trying to solve, not the solution you're trying to deliver, because otherwise you'll sort of focus on, the size of the software, CRM software space, as opposed to like really understanding what are all the different ways that people can solve this, and how big is that? Like, how big is the how painful is this problem? How often do people run into this problem? All of those are good signals on whether the opportunity is big enough for you to justify spending resources to go solution for it.
Okay, thank you. One more question we have. Can you please share some example of hypothesis for B2B product in the initial stage of product development?
B2B in the initial stage. Well, B2B is interesting because sometimes when you're B2B, the user for your solution is not the decision maker for who's going to buy the, let's say, software product. So you want to be really clear which question you're trying to answer. Am I trying to convince the decision maker, or at this stage, early on, am I trying to solve for the end user? And typically, I think, especially now with a lot of enterprise solutions, what you see is that it's almost like solving for a consumer, because many enterprise solutions, if you look at like Slack, they started out with really strong adoption from a small set of users inside an organization. And then as the solution gets more popular, more and more teams within the company start using it. And then eventually it makes it up to a CTO or somebody who's going to actually make a big budget decision about making that product available across the company. And so you just need to think about what kind of product you're building and how you think you're going to ultimately be able to drive sales of that solution. But I think in the very early stages, generally you're going to focus on the specific users that you're solving for and what you need to do to help them, whether it's saving time, doing, just having an easier way to solve the problem. Think about what alternatives they are using. So it could be if when you're really early, you don't need to, let's define early as you don't have the feature built yet, and you don't have even a very robust product built yet. So at that point, you're mostly trying to answer, if I create the solution, will people want it? And so think about whatever business problem you're trying to solve, and and test, if I offer this and I try to pitch this to a few of my target customers, how many people would be interested in using it? You can gauge a lot early on by, this would be a perfect opportunity like for a front door test. You can just see, is there any interest in this problem, and define, what it is. You may say, I would need at least 50% of people to be interested in this solution for me to feel confident I should keep going. And that 50%, it could be, 5 out of 10 early on. There's different ways to just take directional inputs to see if you really have something that's a big enough problem for you to invest in. Are there more questions?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions. I'll ask one more. So this question is from Robert. How do you ensure that you are reaching the right portion of market that you want to test against?
Well, so in the framework, you start with what is your insight? What do you know already about the customer or about the market? And you may not know if it's the quote unquote right part of the market. So start with that hypothesis. Like with your team, think about, I think that, of all the contractors that we're trying to target, the biggest opportunity is going to be with plumbers or whatever it is. Make a call on who you think is your target group, and then go run some tests or do some deeper research to validate if that is true. Usually it's best just to think ahead of what you believe the answer to be, and then validate that, because otherwise you kind of are boiling the ocean, to use that expression. You're just casting a wide net, and you're not being very clear on who you think you need to serve. So wherever you can, just define who you think your customer is, and maybe if it's really important that it is that segment, that all of your tests initially focus on proving out that you're right, that assumption is correct. Those are the main people that you need to focus on. All right, I think we're at.
Yeah. Thank you for the enthusiasm and participation, audience. But due to time constraints, we could take only a few questions, but we intend on answering them all. Please scan the QR code on the screen for an elaborate one-on-one discussion with our career counselor, and to learn more about the product management programs that are offered at the Institute. And Christine, the Q&A session was amazing. We have a plethora of questions still yet to be answered, but let me just direct them to you post the session, and let's see how we can answer them.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks everybody.